Hi, I'm Kat, and today's video was suggested by Patricia Burns, one of my YouTube viewers and subscribers. But before we get started, the word in Romanian for today is manipulator. Ma-ni-pu-la-tor. Manipulator. Well done, guys, you just said manipulator. Did you know that the word gaslighting derives from a play called Gaslight, written by Patrick Hamilton in 1938, which made its debut at the Richmond Theatre, West London in the UK. The plot revolves around the killer husband who is in the process of convincing his insecure wife that she is going insane. The wife keeps hearing strange noises, objects mysteriously appear and disappear, and the gaslight keeps fluctuating in the parlor. But the culprit is Jack, as he searches the house for the jewels of his murdered wife's aunt. When he lights a lamp in one room, the gaslight dims in another. As a phenomenon is nothing new. It's there every day. It could be a white lie or a half-truth to hide an aspect of reality, allowing one person to gain an advantage over the other or the others. More seriously, it can be coercive or manipulative behavior, causing an intended target or victim to act against their will, even to the point of criminality. At its worst, it's a means of willfully controlling a person for physical and mental abuse, deviant gratification, financial gain, or a combination of the three, as is the case of Benjamin Field. Benjamin Field was an English undergraduate at the University of Buckingham. At 20 years old, in April 2011, he met 61-year-old Peter Farquhar, a guest lecturer and novelist. As a deputy church warden at Stowe Parish Church, Benjamin was trusted by the congregation and he wanted to become a priest. He funded his studies by working part-time at the Red House nursing home in Maids Moreton. Peter Anthony Scott Farquhar was born on 3rd of January 1946 in Edinburgh. He was the son of a physician. He attended Latimer Upper School in London and then Churchill College in Cambridge, where he achieved a first-class degree in English. Peter was a teacher of English for 34 years at the Manchester Grammar School between 1970 to 1982 and then Stowe School between 1983 to 2004, where he was the head of English. He retired from Stowe in 2004, after which he lectured at the University of Buckingham. He wrote and published 4 novels. He was described by his friend and former pupil at Manchester, Michael Crick, as having an acute understanding of the problems of modern adolescent boys. For some, he became almost like a second father. Peter was in good health, he was mentally sharp, and he kept detailed journals in which he chronicled his life and thoughts. Peter owned a house at 3 Manor Park, Maids Moreton, for many years, living there with his mother until her death in 2002. He was an evangelical, committed Christian who once considered becoming a minister, but the thing is that he was also gay and he was attracted to younger men, which was a conflict that he resolved throughout his adult life by staying single. Even though he was close to his family and he had a wide circle of friends, Peter was quite lonely and he really craved love and affection. He worshipped and preached at Stowe Parish Church for 20 years. Peter's first novel, A Wide, Wide Sea, a coming-of-age story about 3 teenagers from Edinburgh who traveled to France and Spain on a voyage of self-discovery, was written in 1997, but it was only published in 2015. It was published after 2 Buckingham University students, Benjamin Field and Martin Smith, discovered the manuscript and persuaded Peter to publish it. His novel Between Boy and Man was published in 2010. The plot was heavily based on Peter's experience at Stowe School and follows the struggle of a school chaplain to reconcile his Christian faith with his homosexuality. As a student, Benjamin Field, the Baptist minister's son, came across Peter at the university in 2011 and 2012. He decided to exploit Peter for his own gain. Even though Benjamin was heterosexual with many girlfriends, he became involved with Peter at the same time, set on seducing him. By October 2013, Benjamin convinced Peter that he loved and cared for him, and that he finished with his girlfriends and fell in love with Peter. Benjamin moved in with Peter in November 2013. By that time, Benjamin already decided to get Peter to change his will and to leave his house to him and then to kill him. He started to gaslight Peter, and on his 68th birthday in January 2014, Benjamin proposed to Peter, which he of course accepted. Benjamin also pretended that he discovered his faith, and they went through a betrothal ceremony in St. Mary's Church in Hampstead in 2014, in which they exchanged crucifix necklaces. In one diary entry, Peter described the event as, quote, "one of the happiest moments of my life. Gone are the fears of dying alone," end of quote. In November 2014, as Benjamin was reading Peter's letters and journals to keep ahead of him, Peter changed his will so that Benjamin would get £15,000 and also inherit the house, but only if Benjamin lived in the house for 2 years before Peter's death. Having lived in the house only for 1 year at that point, Benjamin couldn't inherit the house until November 2015 at the earliest. So, from at least January 2015 to the end of September 2015, he started drugging Peter more than 50 times, as well as continuing to gaslight him. The effects on Peter were appalling and to him incomprehensible, but Benjamin simply enjoyed the cruelty. He chose to drug Peter with a psychedelic drug, BK2CB, at the time of the launch of one of his books at Stowe School, which resulted in Peter's complete humiliation. Then he made a film of Peter when he was in bed in a confused state, which mirrored another cruel video that Benjamin made of one of the patients at the nursing home where he was working.
I feel I am so dependent. It's such a strange world, the whole thing, because on the one hand, I'm actually used to be sort of competent.
After Peter got ill because of the drugs, Benjamin started hinting to those who tried helping Peter that he was a drunk, an alcoholic. Benjamin was trying to make it look, when murdering him, that he drank himself to death whilst alone. In mid-September 2015, Peter changed his will again, leaving Benjamin £20,000 and a lifelong right to live in the house, but this time with no requirement to the length of time he would need to be in the house before being able to inherit it. So now, Benjamin was free to kill Peter whenever he wanted to. In early October, Peter went into a nursing home for 5 days where Benjamin was unable to drug him, and Peter recovered considerably, even feeling optimistic about the future. So Peter was released back home. On Sunday, 25th of October, 69 years old by then, Peter was alone in his house when Benjamin came over, got him a drink, a very strong whiskey which was spiked with Dalmane. Sadly, Peter's body was found the next day by his cleaner on his sofa with an upturned half bottle of scotch, and it was believed that he had drunk himself to death. So Benjamin's plan worked, but only for a while. The coroner recorded Peter's death as acute alcohol intoxication. So Peter inherited £20,000 in July 2016 and agreed with the rest of the Farquhar family that 3 Manor Park house should be sold and he should be given half of the net proceeds. The house was sold for £290,000, and in December 2016, Benjamin was paid £142,000. He used part of this money to buy a £97,000 flat in Towcester, Northamptonshire, but Benjamin still wanted more. Peter Farquhar's third book, Wide Wide Sea, was dedicated to Benjamin Field, but the sad reality is that Benjamin was carrying out a meticulously planned campaign to convince Peter that he was losing his mind. Over a long period, he secretly spiked Peter with gin, whiskey, poteen, bioethanol, hallucinogens 2CB, lorazepam, flurazepam, and others to enact a strictly planned program of mental torture by means of gaslighting. Benjamin tried convincing Peter that he was going insane by moving or breaking objects around the home, deleting phone contacts, and even writing cryptic messages on mirrors. Meanwhile, Peter, just like Benjamin, was recording his demise in a diary, in which he wrote, quote, "I wanted to die. I saw awful packs of hideous black insects," end of quote, and told friends that he felt like Shakespeare's King Lear living through his mental breakdown. Benjamin would film Peter for his own amusement, getting a kick of watching him suffer, and he even encouraged him to act suicidal thoughts that Benjamin fabricated. The MO of Benjamin was to befriend vulnerable elderly people, change their will, and make sure that they died. To achieve this, Benjamin spiked Peter's food and drink with hallucinogenic drugs. Peter had been given glasses of whiskey that were supercharged, while his food was laced with drugs. As the drugs took effect, Peter wrote in his journal that he was suffering hallucinations. He wrote that he was becoming paralyzed at the sight of bright lights that appeared to him as he drove. Benjamin Field got his share of the wheel, and he then turned his attention to Peter's neighbor, a retired school principal, 81-year-old Anne Moore Martin, whom Benjamin met in mid-June 2015, 4 months before killing Peter. And he already set his plan in motion for Anne as well. A model in her younger days and a retired head teacher by the time Benjamin met Anne, she had owned 6 Manor Park for many years, initially looking after her mother there, and since 2003, when her mother passed away, living there alone. She survived cancer, and she was a regular Catholic churchgoer with a strong faith. She suffered from 2 brain conditions, but her intellectual powers were still good for her age. She treated her niece, Anne-Marie Blake, as her daughter, and in 2011 left her house and the rest of her assets to Anne-Marie Blake in her will. Anne Moore Martin was loving, kind, and affectionate, but by the time Benjamin met her, she was quite lonely, something that made her vulnerable. With no affection for her at all, Benjamin set on seducing her as well. His goal was to turn her affection from her niece towards him and get her to change her will, so that he would inherit 6 Manor Park, which by then was worth around £300,000 on her death. Before Benjamin murdered Peter, he was delivering cards to Anne, giving her gifts, researching sex with the elderly on the internet, and even suggesting that she watch a film which portrayed a relationship between an older woman and a younger man. The love letters that Benjamin sent Anne early in their relationship left her in little doubt that he fell in love with her, emotionally and physically. He said in one of the letters, quote, "Last aside, I love you very deeply," end of quote. He was 25 years old at the time, and she was 81 years old. Despite the age gap of 56 years, Anne was as besotted with Benjamin as he seemed to be with her. When he sent her a framed photo of himself inscribed with the words, "I'm always with you," she gave it pride of place on the wall above her dressing table. Before Anne met Benjamin, she showed no sign of any decline in her health. In May 2015, she scored normally in a test identifying the early signs of dementia in the elderly. In November 2015, a month after Peter's murder, Benjamin began a sexual relationship with Anne. He engineered breakups and reconciliations and ultimately began staying the night from mid-April 2016 onwards, writing love letters that showed his enjoyment of sharing her home and getting her to watch another film featuring a relationship between an older woman and a younger man. He showed Anne a DVD of the film Harold and Maude about an elderly woman who meets a much younger man, and he also talked about Edward Lear's poem The Owl and the Pussycat as an example of how lovers can be very different but still find happiness. Their relationship grew, and Ben would often stay in the spare room. When he went away on holiday, he wrote to her every day, signing off with love and in Christ, Ben. In another love letter that he wrote to Anne, he said, quote, "I love you, I long to make a life with you, a life of sharing, of mutual nourishment in love and grace," end of quote. Less than 7 months after Peter's death, Anne became besotted with Benjamin. Throughout his relationship with her, Benjamin was still carrying on relationships with other women. Even though he already owned a car, in May 2016 he convinced Anne that he needed money to buy one, and believing him, she gave him £4,400 to buy a car. To prove to her that indeed he bought a car with the money, he hired the car for the day and pretended to her that he had used the money to buy it. In July 2016, Benjamin gave Anne a large photo of himself with the words "I'm always with you" on the frame, and although he had no religious belief himself, he began taking Anne to Mass. That same month, Benjamin broke into 5 Manor Park, the home of the late Mr. and Mrs. Meakin, just for the pleasure of doing so. He gained entry by using a key that they entrusted Anne with, which he took without Anne's knowledge. It's like Benjamin just targeted lonely and vulnerable people on the same street, and of course houses as well. In August 2016, Benjamin took photos of Anne without her knowledge whilst she was performing a sex act on him. His intention was to use them against her in the future if he needed to. He also carried out a burglary at the home of Mr. Elliman, who was then 83 years old, who Benjamin knew from his social contacts with him. Again, Benjamin did this out of pleasure only. In August and early September 2016, Benjamin took advantage of Anne yet again. He deceived her into believing that his younger brother Tom urgently needed a dialysis machine, and for him to carry on living and studying at Buckingham University, he needed a machine, and his family was only able to make a partial contribution to the cost. Benjamin then supervised Anne as she liquidated some of her assets and paid him a total of £26,700. In mid-September 2016, taking advantage of her strong faith, Benjamin began writing messages on mirrors around her house and got her to believe that they were messages from God and that he was receiving them as well. The messages were designed to get Anne to change her will and to leave 6 Manor Park to Benjamin and not Anne Marie Blake, her niece. He also faked a letter from a solicitor to his own intentions to make a will in relation to Anne Marie Blake. And it worked. On 20th of October, Anne Moore Martin instructed a solicitor to change her will. But the solicitor who she instructed was Diana Davis, the same solicitor who dealt with Peter's will, so she knew that Benjamin benefited under it. Diana became suspicious, so when Anne visited her in November 2016, she managed to put her off changing the will at that stage. Diana then sought advice as to how she could bring her legally privileged knowledge to Anne's attention. She managed to get Benjamin's permission to inform Anne about Peter's will and Benjamin's inheritance. Benjamin didn't really have a choice but to agree to it. Because of this, Benjamin gave even more love notes to Anne and renewed the mirror messages. So on 22nd of December 2016, Anne changed her will, feeling pressured to do so, although not really wanting to. Towards the end of 2016, Benjamin set his sights on a bigger prize. He began deploying psychological tactics, which included using a white marker pen to write messages on Anne's mirrors, supposedly from God. In photos found on his mobile phone, he can be seen in the reflection as he takes pictures of these writings, which started with an order to pray for Ben. Ben loves you. Over time, the messages evolved into specific orders that Anne should leave her house to him. The messages eventually led to a note saying that she should leave her house in her will to Ben and not to her niece. Giving him a key to her home, Anne relied on Benjamin, as she appeared to become increasingly absent-minded, unable to find things even when she was sure she knew where she put them. Later, Benjamin would miraculously find them. Of course, that Benjamin was the one who moved them in the first place. This gaslighting was a tactic he used very successfully with Peter. Another was isolating him from friends and family. And again, he used the same strategy on Anne, his new target. Anne-Marie, who had seen her aunt most weekends up until the time Benjamin became a part of her life, found it increasingly difficult to get access to her aunt. She later described her aunt as very much under his spell. Anne had been talking about moving to live with her family who lived elsewhere in the country, but because of Benjamin's manipulation and her feelings for him, she withdrew contact with her family. Anne Moore Martin was described as a love-struck teenager by her sister-in-law Gillian Moore Martin. She said she loved him. She said they would sit together on the sofa and he would put his arm around her and fluff his eyelashes down her cheek. It was as if she was hypnotized by him. Just like Peter, Anne was very religious, very lonely and vulnerable, a perfect candidate for gaslighting. Benjamin even bought her a hand counter to click every time she thought of him, and he filled her house with hand-drawn flowers and photos of himself. In early February 2017, Anne became ill and she was admitted to hospital due to an unexplained seizure. The following day, while she was still in hospital, Benjamin went to Six Manor Park and removed items he believed might be incriminating. When he returned to the hospital later, Anne-Marie Blake, Anne's niece, and her husband were also there, and the niece got suspicious as well. As Anne was recovering at home, her niece contacted Thames Valley Police, accusing Benjamin Field of coercing her aunt into changing her will after learning about the messages on the mirror. When the police discovered that Benjamin was also beneficiary of Peter's will, he was arrested on suspicion of murder only 5 days before he was due to be interviewed by a Church of England panel which would decide whether to put him forward for 3 years of ordination training. At that point, there wasn't enough forensic evidence to charge Benjamin. He was released on police bail pending further investigations and banned from contacting Anne, who was mortified at finding she had been so duped. While investigating, police learned that Benjamin persuaded Peter to publish a handwritten manuscript he had created 2 decades prior. He also set up a company called Farquhar Studies and was the director of the business. Peter had even dedicated his 3rd novel to Benjamin, writing that his encouragement was invaluable. Raising even more suspicions, in the lead up to Peter's death, Benjamin had been working on a documentary film about his life, which was given the working title The Moral of the Story, the literature of Peter Farquhar. Police began working on the theory that Benjamin had poisoned both Peter and Anne in order to get his hands on their substantial estates. According to her niece, Anne was tortured by it and found it very difficult to get her hand around the betrayal. She told her niece, quote, "I'm such an intelligent woman. How could I let this happen to me?" End of quote. After the police were informed, the extent of Benjamin's deception in relation to Anne was revealed, and Anne eventually changed her will back to how it was at the beginning. An investigation into the death of Peter was also begun. Detectives found a video of Benjamin taunting an elderly woman at the nursing home he worked at about her isolation and loneliness. Ways in killing Anne were detailed in tiny writing in notebooks found by the police after Benjamin's arrest, which included making it look as if she choked on her dentures or fallen down the stairs. Another option was to give her a heart attack, possibly during sex. From statements made by Anne Moore Martin and Anne Marie Blake, Anne Moore Martin was deeply affected by the realization of what Benjamin did to her. She died of natural causes in May 2017, having spent the last few months of her life dreading the humiliation of Benjamin's deception if the news went into the press. Benjamin had absolutely no concern for what he did. Later that year, in October, he preached a sermon at his father's church about 20 miles away in Olney, Northamptonshire. He chose to speak about the biblical commandment, "Thou shalt not kill." In the sermon, he argued that when it came to killing, legally enforced norms are less important than one's personal convictions. The investigation ultimately led to Benjamin's arrest and prosecution. He was charged with the murder of Peter and plotting to kill Anne, and his brother, 23-year-old Tom, was also charged with one count of fraud by false representation. Once the connection between Anne, Peter and Benjamin was established, police took the unusual step of exhuming Peter's body and re-examining it. Samples of his hair were tested and toxicological analysis showed that Peter was repeatedly exposed to lorazepam in the 2 months before he died, as well as other sedatives, and couldn't rule out the possibility that he was smothered with a cushion or pillow. 2 of the drugs were recovered from Benjamin's home and his fingerprints were found on the packaging. During the 77-day trial, which began at Oxford Crown Court in April 2019, Benjamin chose to give evidence in his own defense, something that is highly unusual for someone who is charged with murder. Prosecutor Oliver Saxby stated, quote, "The motive was financial gain, laced, as far as Benjamin Field is concerned, with a profound fascination in controlling and manipulating and humiliating and killing. The means were intricate. You will hear evidence of exit strategies, as he called them, involving drugging and alcohol poisoning and suffocation whilst asleep or sedated, and falls at home and attempts to cause heart failure, car crashes even, and unwitting overdoses." End of quote. In court, Benjamin admitted to deception, and alongside diaries, journals and photographs that detailed his campaign, he seemed almost too eager to confess to fraud and duplicity. But when questioned by the prosecution about a particular notebook discovered after his later arrest on suspicion of murdering Peter, which spoke of the story of a man called Ben suffocating an older man called Peter after giving him alcohol and sleeping tablets, Benjamin told the court that he wrote the story as a way of dealing with the awful way he treated Peter in 2015 and trying to come to terms with it. When asked why he never destroyed the notebook, Benjamin replied, quote, "I knew that I hadn't killed Peter, and I thought it would be easy for them, the police, to find out. Because it's a story and it didn't happen. Having written it, it seems obvious it's a story. I know what happened. I didn't kill Peter. And as I know what happened, no crime had been committed. I saw it for what it was, a story that never happened." End of quote. This, on one hand, may seem like, incriminating evidence, but it's possible that Benjamin planted his notebook for the police to find, just as he planted a fake, backdated diary for Anne-Marie, Anne's niece, to discover, in which he described how he'd barely survived following her death, and if he had to abandon her home, he would kill himself, effectively forcing her to give him her home, which she did. Maybe he thought that the notebook would work as well. By being open and honest about the deception, about how unpleasant he was to Peter and Anne, maybe he believed that the court and the jury wouldn't question his honesty regarding his claim that the murder story was simply a work of fiction. He would lose the battle, but then win the war. Go down for a few years for deception, but spare the life sentence for murder. The notebook also offered Benjamin the chance to appear remorseful for harming Peter, and perhaps he was trying to trick the jury with reverse psychology by implying that the police and therefore the jury would be stupid to think the obvious story happened. Benjamin was really trying to gaslight the jury as well, but he failed. On the 9th of August 2019, Benjamin Field was convicted for the murder of Peter Farquhar. However, he was acquitted of the murder of Anne Moore Martin. Senior investigating officer Mark Glover, a retired detective, chief inspector, said that Benjamin fitted the profile of a psychopath. Quote, cruel, calculating, manipulative, deceitful. I don't think evil is too strong a word for him. End of quote. On 18th of October 2019, Benjamin Field, then aged 28, was sentenced for 7 offenses committed in the 4-year period between April 2013 and February 2017, when he was aged 22 to 26. He was sentenced for the murder of Peter Farquhar, who was then aged 69, on 25th of October 2015. He was also sentenced for fraud in the period from April 2013 to October 2015 in relation to the will of Peter Farquhar and his house at 3 Manor Park, Maids Morton, as a result of which he gained over £160,000. He was also sentenced for fraud in the period from June 2015 to February 2017 in relation to the will of Anne Moore Martin, then aged between 81 to 83 years old, and her house at 6 Manor Park, Maids Morton, as a result of which Benjamin hoped to gain around £300,000. He was sentenced to fraud in May-June 2016 on Anne Moore Martin in relation to the supposed purchase of a car, as a result of which he gained £4,400. He was also sentenced to fraud in the period from June to September 2016 on Anne Moore Martin in relation to the supposed purchase of a dialysis machine for his younger brother, as a result of which he gained £26,700. He was also sentenced for burglary in July 2016 of the house at 5 Manor Park, which was unoccupied because of the recent deaths of its owners, Mr. and Mrs. Meakin, during which he stole a bottle of Drum Boy. He was also sentenced for burglary in August 2016 of the house of Jonathan Elliman, then aged 83, at 41 Treefields, Buckingham, during which he stole 3 antique rifles and a bayonet valued together at £450 and also of great sentimental value, which were recovered by the police in March 2017 at one of the addresses where Benjamin was storing property. During his trial, Benjamin admitted that from late 2012 until mid-2017 he lived by deception and deceit and was a well-practiced and able liar to Peter and Anne in pretending that he was in a genuine and caring relationship with them when he wasn't, or to others. I don't know what he was trying to do, because in my opinion clearly that didn't help the jury, because he also admitted how he could manipulate and maneuver people, however skeptical they may have been, to achieve his ends without ever asking them to do so directly. Benjamin also accepted to being a snake talker, as he was able to build pressure on his victims to believe what he needed them to believe and then to do whatever he needed them to do. The court heard that Benjamin suffocated Peter and then left a half-empty bottle of whiskey in his room to make it seem as though he drank himself to death. He was also accused of planning Anne Moore Martin's murder. Benjamin admitted to drugging Peter with benzodiazepines and hallucinogens just to torment him, telling the jury that he did it for no other reason other than he was cruel to upset and torment Peter purely out of meanness. Based on the evidence at trial and the reports of the consultant psychiatrists Dr. Alcock and Dr. Joseph, throughout the 4 years of Benjamin's deception, he had and still has a personality disorder which, whether classified as psychopathic personality disorder by Dr. Alcock or narcissistic personality disorder by Dr. Joseph, included a lack of empathy, a careless lack of concern for the feelings of others, and an incapacity to experience guilt or to profit from experience. As to narcissistic personality disorder, the evidence at trial demonstrated grandiosity, a sense of superiority towards others, the exploitation of others to achieve personal gain, the need to belittle and humiliate others, fixation on fantasies of power and success, intelligence, a need for admiration from others, and a sense of entitlement, together with an unwillingness to empathize with the feelings, needs, and wishes of others. In Dr. Joseph's opinion, Benjamin has very little understanding of his own inner world, leading to his need to deceive and destroy others. He also kept notes and journals about what he was planning and what he had done, and he did it for the pleasure that it gave him. In his report during the trial, Dr. Alcock concluded, quote, "I am not of the opinion that the symptoms of his condition would have substantially impaired his cognitive functioning. In my opinion, Mr. Field knew exactly what he was doing in a carefully planned and orchestrated way and was in full control of his own decision-making when carrying out his described conduct." End of quote. On 9th of August 2019, Benjamin Field was convicted of Peter's murder, and on 18th of October 2019, he was sentenced to life imprisonment for Peter's murder, theft and fraud with a minimum of 36 years. He was acquitted of the attempted murder of Anne Moore Martin. In 2020, Benjamin appealed his conviction, but the following year, the appeal was denied. Tom Field, his brother, was acquitted of fraud. Thames Valley Police made 3 arrests as part of the murder investigation. It took 4 years, 880 statements and an exhumation for the police to discover Ben's awful actions. His hit list, discovered after his arrest, had around 100 potential victims, including his own parents. Benjamin disarmed people by gaining respected positions within both the church and the university, where at one point he was teaching undergraduate seminars. Although the church published a lesson learned review, it seemed keen to see Benjamin as pursuing a scam which was unique, rather than thinking about how other killers might be prevented from gaining positions of trust. The University of Buckingham also didn't question what a student in his 20s was doing, staying in the home of a man in his 60s who was also at some point responsible for the student's instruction and supervision. Senior investigating officer from Thames Valley Police, Mark Glover, said, quote, "Ben can do nothing but disgust you, really. There is a man who cares for nobody apart from Ben Field. He shows no remorse, no regret. He's controlling, he's deceitful, he's emotionless. There is a man who got pleasure from inflicting pain and torment on his victims. The effect that's had on their families, I bet he doesn't even consider that. So nothing but disdain and contempt for Ben Field. He's an evil man." End of quote. Peter Farquhar was described by his students as a powerful personality. For many of his students, he stoked their love of literature and poetry and was said to be able to spot pupils' potential and encourage them to fulfill their dreams. At the Independent University of Buckingham, he was remembered as a charming, erudite, and deeply thoughtful man. He also embarked on a writing career, publishing various novels through Amazon. One of his students was TV journalist Michael Creek, who recalled, quote, "He was one of the most extraordinary teachers of my life, and many former pupils of Stowe and Manchester Grammar School would agree. He was a very inspirational teacher to whom I owe a lot. He was somewhat of a father figure to many of us. He kept in touch with successive generations of pupils and guided them through their early careers. He was a deeply committed Christian." End of quote. For many of them, Peter became a father-like figure, and long after their graduation remained in contact and even developed lifelong friendships. And having reached the end of our video, this, I have to say, is an extreme case and example of gaslighting. So I think that it's really important to recognize signs of someone trying to gaslight you, because it can lead to horrific things. And I'm sure that this is just one example of those horrific things that can happen by whoever is gaslighting someone else. And thank you so much to Patricia for suggesting this. It has been a very eye-opening subject to talk about. Thank you so much everyone for staying with me. Please do let me know what do you think in the comment section down below. For now, stay safe, take care, and I will see you in my next one. Bye!